Ukraine has entered a long war, and this is now being admitted by the collective West. But it's more than just a long war that is the problem here. The problem here is that the war is not winnable. And this is becoming also increasingly clear through the way that the Western mainstream media is talking about Ukraine, talking about its counteroffensive. There are incredible divides that are being had and that are shaping up as the counteroffensive essentially ends. That's what has happened. The counteroffensive has essentially ended. It is slowing down. The weather is about to turn very poor for battle. But even more so, everything that Ukraine attempted to fire on Russia has not moved the needle at all. And so this is a big problem because this is completely against what NATO had said was going to happen. NATO said, and this was the whole plan, that they were going to build off of last year's so-called gains and push through a spring offensive that would essentially end the conflict. Nothing of the sort was ever going to happen, but that was the fantasy. And of course, the NATO, the United States, a lot of their power projection at this point really thrives off of fantasy. The fantasy of exceptionalism, the fantasy of dominance, when all signals point to the erosion of that dominance. So Zelensky just got done at the UN General Assembly this past week of September 18th. And here's what the New York Times had to say about it. Zelensky's visit reveals strategy divide between Ukraine and the US. While the Ukrainian military remains focused on retaking territories in the east, American officials are pushing for a shift to the south. So on September 22nd, the Times said Ukraine will retake the fiercely contested eastern city of Bakhmut from Russia by the end of the year, Zelensky predicted during his visit to Washington. An assertion that shows the gulf between Kiev and American war planners who believe that Ukraine should be focused more on the south. Zelensky, at a meeting with American editors, also predicted that Ukrainian troops would deoccupy 2 more cities taken by Russia. He did not say which cities he was talking about. We will do everything not to stop during the difficult days in autumn with not good weathers and in winter. By contrast, he predicted that Vladimir Putin would pause operations because he lost so many troops. They're dead, Zelensky said. So this is Zelensky's briggadatio. This is his bravado, right? He's really showing out here. Zelensky renewed his plea for long-range missiles, for ATACMS, which the U.S. is saying any day now, but actually word is they're not coming. We don't have another way out, said Zelensky. Intelligence and military officials have long questioned why Ukraine has fought so hard in Bakhmut, the scene of one of the bloodiest battles of the war. In March, Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, said the city was more symbolic than it is strategic and operational in value. But Zelensky has been intent on trying to retake lost territory, and Ukraine has committed a large number of troops and weapons in retaking Bakhmut and defending the surrounding Donbass region. Some American officials say the fight in Bakhmut has become something of an obsession for Zelensky and his military leaders. The Ukrainians' relentless focus on the city led them to believe that a possible victory was just around the corner, long after American officials had countered them to move to other targets because victory for either side would be Pyrrhic. But Mr. Zelensky could be counting on the dysfunction in Wagner mercenary group after the demise of its leader in a plane crash last month. So they're talking about Wagner. That happened a long time ago. Now we're still talking about Wagner here. Oh, the dysfunction of Wagner. If things are so dysfunctional after Prigozhin's death, why hasn't Ukraine been able to make any progress? For Zelensky, his part, he pushed back on any notion that Ukraine was not making its plans deliberately and said his forces were following a comprehensive plans. Those plans have divided Washington and Kiev. So American military officials want Ukraine to push and liberate the city of Melitopol in the country's south. While this has been a focus of recent drives, time is growing short for Ukraine to breach Russian defenses. Retaking Melitopol, American officials have said, would allow the Ukraine to use short-range artillery to decimate Russian supply mines in Crimea, putting pressure on Russian stranglehold there. Some American officials say that the Ukrainian counteroffensive appears likely to fall short of its strategic goals of cutting off, narrowing the land bridge between Crimea and the Russian border. Russian minefields prove a potent defense, and the Ukrainian government has been extraordinarily worried about the high casualties that would be caused by any effort to breach those barriers. U.S. officials said it would soon be even more difficult for Ukrainian forces to sustain a drive forward as the ground becomes soft and muddy. Some say that within a few weeks, Ukraine's army will need time to rebuild their stockpile of equipment and rest forces exhausted by summer fighting. But Zelensky's rebutting these arguments, insisting that Russian forces were looking to take a break. His forces would not stop. I'm not the best person for the military in the world, but I know what Putin wants. I know he needs to pause. So all projection, but this is saying that the United States is not prepared. The United States is not prepared for what's going on, and Ukraine is not going to be able to achieve its goals. So even there, where they're trying to pose this as simply a conflict of how to fight this war, the reality is that they are admitting that actually the counteroffensive as a whole is not going to achieve its goals, and that's why they want Zelensky to be more efficient. They want the Ukrainian armed forces to fight more strategically, i.e., how the United States wants them to fight. The United States wants to see a long war, and they want to see a pause. That's clear from what the New York Times is communicating, albeit through plenty of smokescreen and propaganda. But Alexei Arestovich, you may remember him. He was ousted. He had to resign based on comments he made about a missile that was fired at a residential building in Dnipro. And this happened. When did this happen? Here, we're going to pull it up. I think it says when this happened. April 2022. So early in the war, he wasn't deposed in 2022. When was he deposed now? He had to leave. Let me see. Alexei Arestovich. I'm going to talk about what he commented on. Okay, but he was deposed for making comments, and this is what he has to say: that it's going to last until 2035. All right, 2035. So this is one of Zelensky's top aides who had to resign based on comments he made earlier in the conflict. But this is what I think many people are thinking. The standoff between Moscow and Kiev might evolve into a hybrid war and drag on for years, said Arestovich. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine could continue for more than a decade, said Alexei Arestovich, a former advisor to Zelensky, saying that he predicted the two neighbors are unlikely to resolve their differences in the near future. That will last until 2035 for sure, he said in an interview on September 17th, posted on his YouTube channel. According to Arestovich, Russia is out seeking a new form of empire, which will never come into existence without Ukraine. The former presidential aide, so of course, Arestovich is no friend of Russia. Arestovich is promoting this line that Russia wants to absorb all of Ukraine, and of course that can't be done anytime soon. The former presidential aide then doubled down on his forecast, saying the acute phase of the standoff will continue until 2035. He argued that it does not have to be a military one. The two sides might reach a ceasefire and hostilities altogether, but the conflict would then continue on diplomatic, intelligence, economic, and information fronts. Ukraine has gotten used to living in a situation of constant military threat to maintain advanced alert status, Arestovich said, suggesting Kiev could follow Israel's example if it wants, or should follow its example if it wants to adapt to such circumstances. A war can break out on a border incident, or a border incident might happen at any moment, even after the fighting ends. Well, this has been something that's been talked about. You know, they call Colombia the Israel of Latin America, South America, because of its important role as essentially U.S. military base to terrorize the rest of Latin America. And of course, that has had huge ramifications for Colombia. But Ukraine is becoming a very similar kind of thing. Ukraine is becoming essentially a NATO outpost that is meant to terrorize or attempt to promote and provoke and engage in conflict with Russia. So Arestovich noted in 2020 that he made such a forecast in 2022 of April, just 2 months into the conflict. His words shocked people at the time. On Tuesday, Bloomberg reported that 7 of the world's leading developed economies, known as the G7, believe Russia and Ukraine could be in conflict for another 6 to 7 years. The timeline has been stretched due to the apparent lack of progress in Ukraine's counteroffensive, citing multiple officials. One such official, told Bloomberg that Kiev is likely to struggle with insufficient Western arms, supplies, and rising personnel losses. Regarding such forecasts, Ukraine and its Western backers still oppose the idea of negotiations with Russia and have rejected any resolution of the conflict that involves Ukraine ceding territory that it claims as its own. Moscow has repeatedly said it's ready for peace talks, but insisted they must take into account Russia's interests and the reality of the ground, which saw 4 former Ukrainian territories, of course, be admitted into Russia. So that's what Alexei Arestovich, the former aide who had to resign earlier in the conflict. And he's saying it's going to last till 2035. This is something that many, I think, in at least those who have any kind of reality attached to their heads, this is what they believe, okay? They believe that this is a long war, that this is going to last for a long time. But of course, Arestovich's assertion that this is Russia, that's Russia's promoting this, Russia's provoking this, because even if it's not going to engage militarily, it's going to want to absorb Ukraine otherwise, is false. I mean, this is false. I can show you what is driving Ukraine to continue to be a proxy war for here on out. And it is Ukraine. It is NATO. It is NATO. It is Ukraine's NATO backers. And here you have another indication that this is going to be a long war. You have these tanks and these weapons that are being pledged to Ukraine. Many of them have been burning on the battlefield, the Leopard 2s. These have been burning on the battlefield. A lot of them have been destroyed. And now the United States is saying, this has to be used strategically. And this is what Ukrainian intelligence is saying through its U.S. masters. It says Abrams tanks should only be used for very specific purposes. U.S.-supplied Abrams tanks should only be deployed in Kiev in specific breakthrough operations, or they will be quickly destroyed by Russian forces, said Kirill Budanov, head of the Military Intelligence Directorate, GUR, of the Ukrainian military. Ukraine is looking forward to receiving the 31 M1 Abrams tanks that Washington promised to provide in January. That was 9 months ago. Budanov said in an interview with the War Zone on Friday. During their meeting at the White House on Thursday, U.S. President Joe Biden told Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that the first M1 Abrams will be arriving next week. However, the spy chief warned that if American armor is deployed on the front line and just in combined arms fight, they will not live very long on the battlefield. In order to make the best use of the tanks, Kiev should only engage them in well-crafted breakthrough operations. Mind you, they're supposed to be doing that right now. The whole counteroffensive is supposed to be a breakthrough operation. It's supposed to have beaten back Russia's front line, infiltrated it, destroyed it, and the territory that Russia is defending, that Russia is claiming as its own, that Russia is collaborating with the forces in the Donbass to protect, all of that is supposed to be taken back. It's supposed to be taken back. They literally have been talking about, we're going to take it all back, and then we're going to head to Crimea, and all they can muster are desperate drone strike, desperate airstrike attacks on Sevastopol and Crimea, while they can't even think about deploying the very tanks that they were promised 8-9 months ago. This is how bad the situation is. This is why you're not seeing ATACMS or anything like that be sent either, because the United States is saying, you're not doing well enough. We're not going to go through the Challenger 2s, the Leopards. We're not going to have that with U.S. Abrams tanks. We're not going to see those burn on the battlefield. We're not going to give Russia that public relations boost. We're not going to give them that diplomatic boost because that's what they've received throughout this whole conflict. So I want to now just wrap this up. Okay, I want to wrap up this story by showing you the neocon mentality, okay? So the neocon mentality is what actually is at the root of the problem here, okay? It is what is going to prolong this conflict. It's already doing so. It is the neocon foreign policy establishment that is boosting this idea of a long war of attrition now in order to essentially whitewash the reality of the situation, which is Russia was fighting a war of attrition in order to break down and destroy Ukraine's military capacity, of course, destroy these forces that Canada likes to applaud, the NAZIs that run rampant within Ukraine's political and military structures. But more importantly, the war of attrition fought by Russia was all about keeping Russia stable, keeping ordinary lives of the Russian people stable, trying to lessen the impact on the global economy, attempting in all kinds of ways, real diplomacy, all of which have been rejected for the most part, except for the fact that you also have Europe and many countries, of course, around the world, but Europe in particular, which has been the most rabidly for sanctions and for supporting Ukraine. Now they have been basically violating their own sanctions in order to simply survive economically. But I want to show you the neocon mentality, okay? First, and we're going to do so through our friend Thomas Friedman, one of the most vile neocons on the face of the planet. So Thomas Friedman is promoting a message that I think is very popular, okay? And
I'm Tom Friedman, and I'm the foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times.
Okay, so I don't actually want to play to it yet. It's a pretty long video, so I'm not going to play a pretty long audio. I'm not going to play the whole thing. But I want you just to see I hate the fact that they gloss over it with this blue. But the title here, Bringing Ukraine to NATO and the EU is the Key to Peace. That is the message. Basically violating the security concern, the principal security concern of Russia is what's going to bring peace. That is the mindset here, because the neocons, the foreign policy establishment as a whole, they think like this is their brain trust here. Thomas Friedman, he is their brain trust. He reflects what these forces think, and he is saying that bringing Ukraine into NATO, into the EU, is the only way towards peace. And we're hearing a lot more of this from Jens Stoltenberg and from others who are also admitting that this war is going to be long, that Ukraine is not going to achieve its objectives, but nonetheless, the only way to peace is to achieve NATO's objectives at the expense of Russia. Doesn't sound like a real pathway to peace. So let's listen to some of this.
I just returned from Kyiv, Ukraine, and I would start every day by walking around the grounds of St. Michael's Golden Monastery, which is a beautiful Orthodox church, but also with incredible grounds. There was something very new in the piazza, and it was an exhibition of captured Russian destroyed tanks and armored personnel carriers. Some were fairly intact, others were just completely gutted and rusted. But as I would walk there, this contrast between this rusted military equipment in the middle of this beautiful piazza, and I eventually realized it reminded me of a meteor, that it was like a meteor that came from out.
Apologies. You can tell that Thomas Friedman is excited about war with Russia. Just FYI, if you haven't noticed that already, he's very excited here.
Outer space and landed on this country. Of course, it wasn't a meteor, it was an invasion by Putin's army. Then they're still trying to figure out how to get this meteor out of the heart of their city, out of the heart of their country. That's really the struggle that's going on there. My recent trip to Ukraine taught me the West focus has to be engineering some kind of end to this conflict. And it can only come to an end if Ukraine is in NATO and the European Union.
You see what he did there? This is key, because after that whole flowery Ukraine is trying to liberate itself from Russian occupation through this flowery metaphor that, to me, lost the plot, and I think most people would daze out hearing that, gibberish. You hear that this is the argument. This is what people like Thomas Friedman, as a reflection of the neocon mentality, this is what they want. This is the architects of the conflict. People like him are the ones who boost it, who, and some people like him are actually the ones writing the script. So that is all you really need to know. This is the way that they're going to frame how this is going to go. This long war of attrition, this need to freeze the conflict. Oh, no, 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 no. We don't need to freeze or end the conflict based on any kind of diplomatic resolution, any kind of attempt to reach a balance, a negotiated settlement. No, 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 no. We need to step up. We need to escalate to end the conflict. That is what he's saying.
Adding Ukraine to NATO and the European Union would be the biggest geopolitical shift in our lifetime. You put Ukraine in the EU, and that becomes our Russia policy. I think the best thing that happened in my life was the creation of the European Union. Now, most Americans will do anything for the EU except read about it. Okay. So the EU is this like really boring thing that the Europeans do, and there's a parliament and a commission, and we can't figure out any of it. But in fact, the EU is one of the greatest miracles in global history. A continent, a giant space that from time immemorial basically was famous for endless tribal, ethnic, and nationalist family conflicts.
So Thomas Friedman is, again, this is how they think. The EU is this great civilization, heralding advancement for the world. Mind you, the European Union is in recession. The entire Eurozone is set to contract economically. And it's not Russia's fault, it's the EU's fault. The EU hasn't built anything in years. You go to Europe, go anywhere in Europe, see what the EU has built. Have they been doing what China has been doing? Have they been building anything? No, the EU has been a lapdog of the United States, its foreign policy, its global economic policy of super exploitation. Look at what's happening in Nigeria. We can go on and on and on. With France and the UK and Germany as being the head, essentially, of the Eurozone. Germany is gutting itself. It's destroying its own economy just to fight the US's war. Blue helped cover up for the destruction of Nord Stream. We can go on and on and on, but this is the neocon mentality. The EU is wonderful. NATO is wonderful. We'll continue just for a little longer.
Became the biggest center, geographic center of free markets, free people, the rule of law, and human rights. That is a miracle. It's an incredible, boring miracle. If we bring Ukraine into that European Union, that would be one of the most consequential geopolitical tipping points since East Germany was united with West Germany. East Germany. Who was the Russian spy in East Germany who was introduced to international relations by running the KGB there? It was Vladimir Putin. It was Vladimir Putin whose big introduction to geopolitics was watching the magnet of the West melt down East Germany.
I mean, this guy has a flair for torturing us. Just torturing us with complete historical distortions and Putin war pornography. I mean, I said I was going to play you a little bit more. I think I'm going to stop there because I think what we just need to know, later he's going to argue that NATO is, of course, the military arm of global Western democracy, and Ukraine needs to join in order to be fortified and protected. I don't need to give you more of a rundown because I don't think I can take anymore, and I don't think you all can take anymore. But the point is Thomas Friedman, people like him, these are people who are in the positions of power in Washington, in NATO, in the EU. They are the ones who are going to drive the prolonging of this war because they're making the argument, as shown here by Friedman, that Russia's top security concern, its top issue, Ukrainian membership in NATO, should be accelerated and forwarded. And mind you, this is a fantasy. This isn't going to happen anytime soon. Actually, I don't even think the Biden administration, Trump, anyone in the U.S. Establishment who is going to take the helm of the commander-in-chief position, regardless of whether it's Biden or Trump or whoever else, they don't want it either. because FAFO, mess around and find out. See what happens when Russia joins NATO. You think the war is bad now? You think the conflict, this war of attrition, this special military operation is the worst that it can get? See what happens if Ukraine is admitted into NATO. There's a reason why Ukraine is not in NATO. But I'm just going to show you who Thomas Friedman is. These are the architects. These are the same people. He wrote this in 2015, basically saying that you need to arm ISIL. Go ahead, ruin my day. Okay, so I'm going to show you where he makes this argument. He talks about Israel, blah, blah, blah. We can't wage these wars. So he says, okay, so we learn to live with Iran on the edge of a bomb, which he's a huge proponent of the lie that Iran is trying to build a nuclear weapon. But we shouldn't at least bomb the Islamic State to smithereens and help destroy the head-chopping menace. Now, I despise ISIS as much as anyone, but let me just toss out a different question. Should we be arming ISIS? Or let me ask it differently. Why are we, for the third time since 9/11, fighting a war on behalf of Iran? That's how he viewed the US's fraudulent war on terror in the region when it comes to Syria in particular. That's how he viewed it. The United States, the Pentagon, the CIA, funding armed groups, most of them jihadists, to fight each other, Al-Qaeda affiliates. And he's saying we need to find ISIS. We need to arm ISIS. This is not some coincidence. The US was already doing this in a certain capacity. But that is who Thomas Friedman is. That's question he asked, he answered in the affirmative. We probably should be, because it would we would stick a needle in the eyes of our so-called adversaries. This is how the neocons think. By any means necessary. Arm ISIS. Arm Al-Qaeda. Fund and arm the Ukrainian former SS Waffen division holdovers now in Azov. That's what you should be doing. That's how the United States is going to maintain its supremacy. All right. And lastly, okay, I'm going to show you. Hold on one second. So Thomas Friedman supported the Iraq War. I'm actually not going to show you that video. He supported the Iraq War. He was a hawk. He is a hawk. But his hawkishness, I just wanted to end this segment, is an example of what they are thinking. What they're thinking on Ukraine is a reflection of how they thought about Syria, how they thought about Iraq. It's all part of a continuous foreign policy spearheaded by the United States. The United States, led by the neocon foreign policy establishment, now wants to dismember Russia, wants to dismember China, wants to weaken them, contain them, destroy them in order to maintain and expand its hegemony. All of the wars it fought prior, from the disastrous intervention in Libya to Iraq, that are still having huge ramifications today. Just look at what's happened to Libya. All of it is part of a continuous process of expanding this decrepit empire to destroy any hope for genuine peace, for peaceful development, for stability, and most importantly, for the needs of all people who are suffering in this world to find a better way, to find a better life. This includes, of course, the global south, the oppressed countries of the world that Russia and China are aligned with and also should be included in when it comes to the hybrid wars waged against them. And it also includes people in the collective West themselves, who are seeing their livelihoods, their living standards decline and drop as Canada applauds former Nazis, as the United States and NATO arm them to fight Russia, and as the overall picture when it comes to Ukraine gets bleaker and bleaker, and yet the United States is not thinking about pulling back, pulling out. No, it is thinking about escalating, expanding, just taking a pause and a breather while it narrative managed manages the situation, while it starts to shape, as Thomas Friedman is, this idea that, yeah, maybe we need to pause, maybe we need to end the war, but we can do it on terms of our liking. We can do it by pushing our objectives nonetheless, and probably also finding other areas to achieve objectives elsewhere. That is why, I mean, this is a big reason why the United States does not want to go all in on Ukraine in the way that Zelensky has hoped. Zelensky thinks his mission is the most important one, to destroy Russia. The United States says, well, if we try to destroy Russia, we'll get into a war that we probably can't handle, and then we won't be able to destroy China. This is the navigation of the United States right now. This is the negotiation that the ruling elite, the neocons, this is what they're thinking about. They're not thinking about Ukraine or Ukrainians or democracy or anything like that. They're thinking about how they can hedge their bets and win the world through destruction, win it through destruction, and essentially maintain control over the lives, the wealth, and of course, the political direction of the world until further notice. The end of history is what they are fighting for. Of course, though, it's a fantasy, it's a myth, and we are seeing it unravel in Ukraine as NATO, as the United States, as the forces of Wall Street, the Pentagon, the military-industrial complex, they all start to cope with the fact that this conflict is not going to end anytime soon, and their objectives have essentially failed. Their objectives are not going to be met, and now they're going to have to try to find a way to prolong the conflict so they can regroup and then try again another time. That's what we cannot allow them to do. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.